Greetings, Lumen students. It is week 12. This is your Wednesday video. I am dressed with a hunchback this morning so that I can tell you the story of Constance. She's another character in our medieval times story. We read about the Lord's nephew, the knight's son, and now we're going to read about Constance the pilgrim. Okay? So what was it to make a pilgrimage? I'm going to learn about pilgrims. You might think that pilgrims are just associated with Thanksgiving. Well, they're not. The idea of pilgrims came from the medieval times. And medieval pilgrims would travel, so the word pilgrim has to do with the fact that they would travel a great distance from one place to another. And they would travel to places that were considered sacred or holy. They wanted to go to places where saints had been killed, for example, maybe even to where Christ had lived or different apostles had lived. So they felt like if they went to these sacred sites where miracles had happened or where amazing things had occurred, that their prayers would have greater weight or power. God would listen to them if they prayed, for example, near a holy well, which is where Constance wants to go. During the Middle Ages, thousands of pilgrims would travel to pray in the presence of a saint's body or close to the spot where a saint had been martyred. The physical remains of a saint, even a fingernail or a lock of hair, were believed to be magic and have miraculous powers. Okay? So it's kind of interesting to think about and relates to the Crusades and what we've learned about with knights. So as the pilgrims would try to travel to Jerusalem, the Saracens who lived there were not always welcoming and didn't always want pilgrims traveling to their land, especially when there were so many of them. And so that is why the Crusades were called for, is to make the way free for these pilgrims to travel. And as Simon said, my grandpa went on a crusade and he killed the Saracens. We're going to take back Jerusalem was the motto of the Crusaders, so that pilgrims can travel here freely. We're going to make it safe for all Christians. Well, the Crusades were not always successful, not fully successful. We're not really successful. And even children participated in these Crusades, which is one of the things you can learn about. Let's learn about this pilgrimage that that Constance wants to go on. She wants to go to a place where Saint Winifred had been miraculously had a miraculous kind of experience that you might enjoy. Kind of reminds me of the stories that we're telling in 7 Wonders of Sassafras Springs. I am a pilgrim to the Winifred's well, for St. Winifred's well will heal me. When I come back, I will have no need of a heavy cloak to conceal me. Though I was born crooked-backed, crippled, and fell, I will be cured at St. Winifred's well. St. Winifred was a beautiful maid, and evil Caradog desired her. He sought to seize her against her will, but her love of God inspired her. When she refused him, full of dread, he took up his sword and he smote off her head. But there was the miracle. Winifred's blood was crystal clear and flowed like a wave. The good earth opened, and the evil Caradog was swallowed, unshriven, sucked into his grave. And Winifred's neck went back to her head, though she had the scar always, or so it was said. But though she recovered, that magical spring comes forth clear and clean to the self-same day. And so, though my journey be long and hard, I will kneel by the shrine of the well and pray. For a hunchback's life is full of scorn. I have known more sorrow than tears can tell. There are times when I wish I had never been born, but I will be healed at St. Winifred's well. So, isn't that kind of a funny tale? An example of a a saint. In the Catholic Church, historically, people were made saints when they were martyred or when they were killed for the cause of Christ. And you may want to learn about another one of those saints and their martyrdom. Saint Valentine is an interesting character to learn about, as is Saint Nicholas and others. So you can see, if you can find out some more about Saint Winifred, little students, if you want to do a little bit more about her. Okay, so Constance thinks that traveling to this water is going to make her better and get rid of her hunchback. Sadly, in the medieval times, any sort of deformity or disability or anyone who was crippled or in any way was seen as having sinned or done something to make God angry. They didn't understand, and so she has had a really hard life, and she thinks she needs to travel to this place. Need is one of the review words that we're going to cover today. How about need? Okay. Saint Winifred, okay, she refuses Caradoc. He is an evil man. She loved Christ, wanted to be faithful, and she could have kneed him, right, to get away, to use your knee in defense. How about need? To make bread. Maybe Constance made some bread and needed it to take on her pilgrimage, on her journey. Kind of interesting that even though Winifred's head was cut off, her veins did not spout regular blood. It was crystal clear water. So that's the spelling of the word vein. Here is the spelling of another type of vein, V-A-I-N. It was in vain that Caradoc tried to get Saint Winifred to go with him. She did not want to. So in vain, meaning it's hopeless, a worthless case. And finally, a weather vane. Okay, maybe Constance will pass a weather vane as she travels to St. Winifred's Well. Those are the spelling words that you can work on for today, students, and review those as we get ready to take a little review quiz at the end of this week. I want to also read to you, of course, in 7 Wonders of Sassafras Springs, the title of this chapter. We're going to finish this before Thanksgiving, and I encourage you again to consider some of the stories that your family might have to tell, some of the wonders that exist for you in your family. This is days 6 and 7. I start again. It poured rain on Monday like the monsoon rains in India I read about in Hardy T. Lang's book. The weather was good for the crops, but not good for wonders. On the other hand, folks wouldn't be able to get out and trade stories about me getting tipped over in the outhouse for a while. Even with the rain, the cows needed milking, the chickens needed feeding, and Aunt Pretty needed someone to stir the catsup she was making and to taste it as well. Pa thought it was fine weather to mend the fence, but when he came in from lunch, dripping like a drenched cat, he admitted that it might be a good afternoon to sit inside and balance his accounts. I thought of going down to the store, but there's a lake in the middle of Yellow Dog Road, he explained. Taste this. Aunt Pretty stuck a wooden spoon, dripping with catsup, into Pa's mouth. Good as ever, said Pa. Will you be making chili sauce too? As if there's ever been a year I didn't, said Aunt Pretty. Is it a tad on the sweet side? Well, I like it sweet, said Pa. Pa chewed on the sandwich Aunt Pretty set down before him. I guess this weather's put a crimp in the Wonders business. Yep. I didn't want to talk about it. Still, you say you got 5 Wonders in 5 days? That's not bad. But if I don't get out today, I'll have to get 2 of them tomorrow. Aunt Pretty ladled catsup into the waiting jars. Seems to me the boy could have a break on account of the rain. Pa considered that thought for a bit. If I give him an extra day, he'll take an extra day. Let's leave it at 7 and see what he comes up with. My aunt sighed. Papa acted like he didn't hear her and went back to eating, and so do I. Later, when the ketchup didn't need tasting and Pa was going over figures in a big black book he kept, I did some accounting myself. 5 Wonders, or even 6, weren't worth a thing.
I'd uncovered some amazing things, but I'd stirred up some trouble as well. I wasn't certain if I could find 2 other wonders, and I didn't know if I wanted to try anyway. I drew up a map of Sassafras Springs and marked off all the farms and houses I knew of. Then I made a list of all the families I knew and checked off everyone I'd visited or talked to so far. I was hoping when I had everything written down, it'd be clear what my next step would be. There'd be some place I'd forgotten that would clearly have a wonder or 2 sitting around collecting dust. Why, I'd almost forgotten that ancient temple in the apple orchard, somebody would say. I think there's a Trojan horse right next to it. The Trojan horse was something I wished I could see, but it was long gone. Imagine a wooden horse so big that the whole Greek army could get inside as a trick to get into Troy and fight their enemies. The only trick we'd had in Sassafras Springs recently took place in the old outhouse in the woods, and I didn't want to think about that again. My list showed that there were some scattered spots I'd missed. The rest of the houses in town, all grouped around the sailor's place. The rest of Bent Fork, but I'd be surprised if anybody but Calvin Smiley could come up with a wonder. The east side of the ridge, the Bowies lived there, but Albert would have told me by now if they had a wonder. There were a couple of other farms. The mayor lived up there, but I hated to bother such an important person. Then there was a spot where the ridge dropped off into Rooster Hollow, where Uncle Alf D. lived. He raised prize-winning mules there, and it would take a mule to get down the steepy rocky trail to his place. No wonder I'd put that one off so far. It was a small list, not too promising. But I never would have guessed Ray Ellen had a wonder either. I decided if it wasn't raining the next day, I'd give it another try. By supper time, I had my list. Pa's books were balanced, and we had 36 jars of ketchup lined up on the windowsills. It rained until dawn on Tuesday, or so Pa told me later. As soon as the sun was due to rise, the downpour stopped. I didn't see it myself because I was still sleeping. I'd been getting out of bed at sunrise my whole life, but for some reason that morning I slept in, and no one woke me up. I was wide awake, though, when I went into the kitchen for breakfast and saw that Aunt Pretty wasn't alone. Sitting at the kitchen table as if he ate there every day was Coogie Jackson, digging into a plate of biscuits and ham gravy. "There's our sleepyhead," Aunt Pretty greeted me. "Howdy, Eben," Coogie grinned. "What are you doing here?" I guess I didn't sound overly friendly. "Calm down," said Coogie. "I'm here to make up for what happened the other day." I slid into my seat at the table, and Aunt Pretty set down a plate for me. I think I want to turn so you can see my hunt as I read. I think that's awesome. "I was just having fun." Coogie stopped to take a big gulp of milk. "Judd said how important this wonder thing was to you, so I'm here to help you." "Help me what?" "Find those last 2 wonders. Jeb's coming too." Jeb had talked to Coogie about me? I guess he was still my best friend, even if he'd understand about exploring and wonders and such. I glanced over at Aunt Pretty. "I'm supposed to find them on my own." "Land's sakes, nobody said a friend couldn't point one out to you," she said. "Why, that Ray Ellen brought one right to your door." Just what I didn't want Coogie to hear, but it turns out he knew already. "That's right. If Ray Ellen has a wonder, anybody can have one." "But Pa needs me to work." "He went down to pick up the mail, Eben, but he said to tell you that you have the whole day off," Aunt Pretty announced proudly. Everybody was acting mighty peculiar. I was trying to figure it out when Coogie wiped his mouth with the napkin and pushed his chair back. "Miss McAllister, you are the best cook in the county," he said, "just like everybody says." "Can't you stay for seconds?" My aunt sounded kind of wistful. "No, ma'am," he answered. "Not on a 2-wonder day." I shoved in another mouthful of biscuit and pushed my chair back too. As we left, Coogie told my aunt, "Better not expect him for lunch." Sal was out of the door before we were, as usual. We stopped by the Austins' place to pick up Jeb. "Don't you have to look after your brothers and sisters?" I asked. "Nope," said Jeb. "Guess this is some kind of holiday." I looked at Jeb and Coogie. "No tricks?" "Just wonders," said Coogie. It seems that Coogie and Jeb thought finding wonders was like picking apples. The more people you had, the faster you could gather them. But it seems that they were wrong. If you ever want to learn more about your neighbors, just go ask them for wonders. You'll learn more than any census or government survey will ever tell you. Here's what I found out that day. On the whole, folks don't like to open their doors to barefoot boys in dusty overalls. Which makes Lily Sailor a wonder in herself, because she not only let us in her fancy house, she showed us her valuables and she gave us chocolate. On the whole, rich or poor, most folks believe they are in possession of a wonder, whether it's their grandfather's glass eye, a silver spoon from the Palace of Electricity at the 1904 World's Fair, or a pumpkin that's a dead ringer for Abe Lincoln. And I'll say that long skinny pumpkin was every bit as awesome as a little pearl that comes from an oyster, aggravated by a grain of sand. On the whole, folks have a hard time saying that they don't own anything special. So you can fritter away a considerable amount of time looking at knives with broken blades, faded lace doilies, or recipes for moonshine. But on that last subject, my lips are sealed. So what started out like a lark, at least in Coogie's mind, ended up being a job. It seemed before we knew it, it was afternoon and we hadn't found a wonder or had a bite to eat. Coogie's idea of skipping lunch was not working out. "Why don't you go home?" I told Jeb, who was holding his stomach and moaning with hunger. "Because I promised I wouldn't quit until we had 2 wonders," he said. "You didn't promise me," I told him. "I know, but I promised myself." "I'm not quitting," said Coogie, "but if somebody had a wonder that included fried chicken, I wouldn't be sorry," he admitted. Coogie thumped. I was too grateful for his help to suggest he eat a June bug. Those days were over for both of us. "What's left?" Coogie rubbed his belly with both hands. I looked at my list. I did the town and the hollow. You and Jeb covered the Peavies and the Cuthberts. Oh, we haven't seen Uncle Alf D. "I can't make it all the way down to Rooster Hollow. I'd faint from hunger," said Jeb. Coogie glanced up the hill. "How about a watermelon to tide us over?" "Watermelon," Jeb moaned. "Don't torture me." 1 watermelon can fill up 3 boys in a hurry, and Coogie had just spotted a mess of ripe watermelons on the hillside. "Stilling's no good," I told him. I was quite sure those watermelons weren't growing wild. "How are we going to cut it?" Jeb asked, as if he hadn't heard me. "With a rock." "I know how," said Coogie. I guess he hadn't heard me either. I gave in, figuring nobody would miss 1 watermelon out of so many. "Be quick about it." Coogie thumped 2 or 3 of the biggest melons, then made his selection, and Jeb found a rock. "Not out here in the open," I said. The 2 of them picked up the watermelon and carried it toward a stand of trees, while I scanned the hillside for witnesses. I didn't see a soul, so I almost fainted when I felt a firm hand on my shoulder, and a deep voice spoke. "Boy, I want to talk with you." I slowly turned to face Marvin Peavy, the elected and respected mayor of Sassafras Springs. "Come with me." Sal wagged her tail, but I didn't. I knew I was caught red-handed. There was no arguing with the mayor, who counted the county sheriff as a close friend. As Sal and I followed him up the hill, moving toward his farm, I looked around, but I saw no sign of Coogie, Jeb, or the missing melon. Since Sassafras Springs is small, being in charge of it doesn't pay much, so Mayor Peavy continued to farm full-time. Still, Pa always told me that the mayor was a man to be respected. "He's as upright as the preacher," said Pa, "maybe even more so." Mayor Peavy never looked back at me, but there was no point in me running away. He and Pa were pretty close, and I'd get found out sooner or later if I ran. Once I got to his farm, the mayor spun around and looked me in the eye. "Now, I want to know the truth." The truth was, I didn't steal the watermelon, but a judge would call me an accessory to the crime, which means I was guilty anyway. "Yes, sir." "Why in God's green earth did you ask everybody in Sassafras Springs for a wonder except me?" I was struck dumb by that question, since I thought this conversation was going to be about watermelons, not wonders, but somehow I found my voice. "I believe Jeb Austin asked Mrs. Peavy this morning." Mayor Peavy glanced toward the farmyard where Mrs. Peavy, the first lady of Sassafras Springs, was carrying slops to the hogs. The Peavys raised hogs fine enough to give the Bowies competition. "Sometimes you can have a wonder right under your nose," he said. "But if you don't know the meaning of it, it's worthless." Without a word of explanation, he walked toward his house. A voice rang out, "Mind your manners now!" I jumped, but it was just Mrs. Peavy talking to her rambunctious hogs. A minute later, the mayor came back outside carrying something under his arm. "A boy like you might benefit from seeing this," he said. He unrolled a huge piece of blue and gray fabric and held it up. Big red letters woven into the cloth spelled out Buddy across the center. "Who's Buddy?" I asked. "You'll find out in good time. Now, this may seem like an ordinary old piece of cloth with a name on it, but when you hear how it was made, you better sit while I tell you." The mayor and I settled down on a couple of old log ends, set up like stools. Sal picked out a patch of shade and lay down for a nap. and I guess she sensed another story coming on. Mayor Peavy's story, The Song of the Loom. Back when I was growing up, there were a few ornery youngsters around Sassafras Springs who gave folks a terrible time. But the worst of those children was a boy named Buddy. Now, there may have been reasons why Buddy acted up. He still had no mother, and his father drank. And when he drank, he got mean. Still, the boy had been to Sunday school, and he knew right from wrong. Most folks do. Late one night, those boys and girls led by Buddy crawled in the school teacher's window, stole his trousers, and sewed the legs together. They sneaked back in and laid those trousers back over his chair, neatly folded. And in the morning, they heard the teacher yelling for miles around. He put on his trousers, tried to take a step, and toppled over. He hit his head on the bedpost and got a dandy black eye, and there was no school for a week. No one minded missing a week of school, I've got to say. Still, that was a pretty mean trick. Even though the school teacher blamed Buddy, nobody had any proof, so Buddy went unpunished. And that just encouraged him to keep up his reputation as the #1 scallywag in Sassafras Springs. One night, Buddy tucked a few friends into tying Old Man Munson's brand new buggy up in the branches of a tree. Mr. Munson was so proud of that thing, he washed and polished it every day till it glowed in the dark. And when he saw his expensive beauty dangling from the tree, the old man flew into a rage. He grabbed his scythe and cut the thing down, which is exactly what Buddy hoped he'd do. He watched from the woods, laughing like a lunatic, as that fancy new buggy crashed to the ground and broke into 100 pieces. Old Man Munson had some kind of a fit and ran off into the woods screaming. He was never quite sure who played that dirty trick on him in the first place, though of course everyone suspected Buddy. Anyway, you can see how Buddy got to be known as the worst boy in Sassafras Springs, even though no one ever caught him in the act, not once, until he tried to play a trick on old Emma. Everybody in Sassafras Springs called her Old Emma, and she was definitely old. She was also blind, completely blind. She lived with her daughter Lulu and Lulu's family, and all day long old Emma sat at her loom weaving cloth. Now that might sound like a funny thing for a blind person to do, but old Emma hadn't always been blind, and she said her fingers still remembered what to do. How she'd thread that loom, or not seeing a thing, no one ever knew. She'd thread it and throw the shuttle and start working the foot treadles. Weaving's like playing the organ, the way you move your feet on those pedals. And once old Emma got the loom going, it practically sang a song for her. Warp and woof, shoot the shuttle back and forth. Warp and woof, lock it, roll it, start again. That's how it went, I recall. And her weaving looked good, too. She still remembered what colors and patterns looked like. She always said that the loom told her what colors to put where. It may not make sense, but if you'd seen her weaving, you'd believe it. Old Emma liked to keep her independence, so Lula fixed up ropes leading from the house out to the shed where she kept her loom, and another one from the shed out to the privy. Old Emma would grab onto the ropes and feel her way along until she got where she wanted to go, and that way she didn't have to ask anybody for help. One day, Buddy got a notion that he thought was funny. Fact is, it was just plain mean. When it was dark, Buddy sneaked over, untied those ropes, and fixed them so they led way out into the woods. And then he added more ropes and built a kind of a maze that looped around all the trees. He meant to confuse her, but he got more than he bargained for. At the crack of dawn, as was her habit, old Emma started out to the shed. She followed those ropes round this tree and that, and instead of working her way back to the house like Buddy figured, she got all tangled up in the bushes, then twisted her ankle and fell. She screamed till she was hoarse. When her folks finally found her teeth were chattering, and she was scared half to death, the poor woman. Who could have done such a thing? Nobody would own up to it, especially not Buddy. He said he'd been home reading a book the teacher gave him, and he told the whole story of that book to prove it, and he was convincing. I'll find the truth of who did it, old Emma told everybody she talked to. The loom will tell me. I'll weave a piece of cloth that will tell me exactly who's guilty. And when Buddy heard that, he got a mite nervous. The next night he sneaked into old Emma's shed, and he got into her bobbins of thread, and there were big rolls of thread in all different colors. She kept them in order so she'd know which color to put on next. Buddy mixed them all up. He figured whatever she wove would be gibberish because the colors wouldn't be the way she wanted them. The next morning, old Emma went out to the shed and started weaving. She wove all day, and when her daughter came out to tell her it was lunchtime, she wouldn't stop. "The loom is singing to me, Lulu," she told her. "The loom knows the secret, and it will tell the truth." Later, Lulu came out to tell her mother it was time for supper, but old Emma wouldn't stop weaving. "I can't interrupt the song of the loom," she said. Lulu brought her a basket of food because she knew once her mother got an idea in her head, nothing would change her mind. Old Emma wove all night long. Buddy sneaked by, and he could see her silhouette in the moonlight through the window, sitting in the pitch dark, weaving away. That sight gave Buddy the jim jams, and well, it should have. The next morning, when Lulu and her family got up, old Emma was sitting in the kitchen with a cloth rolled up on her lap. "I'm finished," she said. "I'll see that the guilty one is punished now. You'll have to read me what it says." She held up the cloth. "This cloth I showed you," and Lulu saw the big red letters. They spelled out Buddy. Old Emma insisted that Lulu take her over to Buddy's house. She banged at the door and woke up his pa. That took quite a while, since he was sleeping off a bottle of moonshine as usual. She kept banging on the door, and when he opened it, she told Buddy's pa what had happened, and then she showed him the cloth. Buddy watched from the shadows, sweating. "What do you have to say for yourself, young man?" old Emma asked. When Buddy saw his name in big red letters, his knees got all weak. Mixing up the yarn hadn't done a thing because the loom knew he did it, and old Emma had heard the song of the loom. "I'm sorry," he said. "I fooled with those ropes as a joke, but I'm sorry I did." "You're no dang good," his father shrieked as he rolled up his sleeves. "I'll beat some sense into you." "No," said old Emma in a voice so loud it shut Buddy's paw right up. "Did you say you're sorry?" she asked the boy. "I'm as sorry as a person can be." Buddy's voice was shaking. "Are you sorry enough that you're not ever going to do anything bad to anybody again?" old Emma asked. "Yes, ma'am," said Buddy, his voice cracked. "I'm only going to help folks from now on, I promise." "He's no good," the father argued. "No," said old Emma, "I believe him. In fact, I believe he could be the most helpful person in Sassafras Springs. The loom told me so." Old Emma handed Buddy the cloth and told him to keep it always so he wouldn't forget. And the wonder of it all isn't that the word appeared here or that his pa didn't beat him. The wonder is that Buddy never did anything bad to him, to anybody again. He spent every day since then trying to help folks. Now that, my boy, is a wonder that's higher than your highest pyramid and deeper than your deep blue seas. That is a wonder of Sassafras Springs. That was one whale of a story, all right, but I didn't know of anybody in Sassafras Springs called Buddy. "How'd you end up with this cloth, Mayor?" I asked. "I told you, young man. Old Emma gave it to me, and it changed my life," said the mayor. I gasped. "You don't mean you're—" "I'm Marvin Peavy's son. Growing up, everybody in Sassafras Springs called me Buddy. Ask your pa." I shook my head. "I can't believe you would do such awful things." "Neither can I," said the mayor. "I didn't think I was being mean. I thought I was smarter than other folks. I was so smart, I was a smart aleck, I tell you. But on that day, I saw that I could use my brains to do good things, too. I saw the light, even. And I keep this cloth hanging on my wall to remind me that there are some things you can't hide, so you might as well be honest." "I'd call that a wonder," I said. By doggies, I could hear the train whistle calling me to Colorado. I could feel the tug of the wheels pulling the cars up the mountain. Still, something was bothering me. "Mayor Peavy, I guess I have to tell you I did something pretty bad today, and I don't want to hide it." The mayor raised one eyebrow and waited. "My friends and I helped ourselves to one of your watermelons over on the hill. We were powerful hungry, but it's still stealing, isn't it?" The mayor stroked his chin. I waited, and waited some more. "One watermelon? Well, I think we could call it even, if you and your friends could give me an hour or two of chopping wood this week." I was plain relieved. Sounds fair. But something else was still nagging at me. "Mayor Peavy, where'd that loom go anyway?" The mayor shrugged. "Don't know," he said. "I guess Uncle Alf D has it." "Why's that?" "Uncle Alf is Lulu's son. Old Emma was his grandmother. And if you need another wonder, I advise you to pay him a visit. And if you don't, you'll hear about it."
Well, students, I hope you enjoyed that story. I sure liked hearing about Buddy and the fact that he was able to change his life. That is pretty wonderful, I think. And we can make better choices too. And I hope that if you make a mistake, if you're mean or dishonest, that you will remember that story about Buddy and how he became the mayor and the kindest and most helpful person in Sassafras Springs. We'll catch you next for the final wonder and some more schoolwork tomorrow, some more history and language arts. See you then.